The grand reopening of Goldman Pharmacy was a big event, and Peter Griffin noticed the bright open sign that Mort had hung outside. Curious, he asked if he could take it home, and Mort happily gave it to him. Peter returned to the Griffin house, where he enthusiastically placed the open sign on their door. Lois was baffled by his decision and quickly reminded Peter that they didn't run any sort of business and therefore had no use for an open sign. But Peter, always one for unusual ideas, brushed her off, feeling excited about what he imagined could be his next venture. Much to Lois's dismay, people started knocking on their door, curious about this supposed business the Griffins were now running. The crowd of strangers rifling through their belongings made Lois extremely uncomfortable. Peter, however, saw it as an opportunity to make some extra cash. He started selling off various items from around the house, and things quickly spiraled. At one point, he even sold Lois's cherished wedding dress without telling her. Soon, the Griffin house looked like a bustling thrift store, with people freely browsing around. One afternoon, Peter was busy painting a family portrait he'd been commissioned to do, hoping to add art services to his list of ventures. However, his interpretation was far from what the family expected. Instead of realistic faces, he had painted something that looked more like a caricature with surreal, exaggerated features. The family was not pleased with the final product, and Peter's portrait services quickly fizzled out. Joe eventually showed up, noting the chaos at the Griffin's house. He warned Peter that he might have to shut down his business, due to a lack of proper permits and licensing. Peter was livid, venting his frustrations to Quagmire that evening about how he felt the government was unfairly meddling in his entrepreneurial freedom. In the midst of his anger, Peter heard about a Tea Party rally supposedly supporting the autism cause, but in reality, it was part of a larger movement advocating for reduced government interference. Peter, who now saw himself as a crusader against government control, eagerly joined the rally, excited to take back what he saw as his rights. Brian, however, tried to caution Peter, explaining that the Tea Party movement was backed by large corporations interested in minimizing government regulation for their own gain, not for the average person's benefit. Peter's enthusiasm didn't waver, and soon he and his pals attended the grand opening of the Tea Party headquarters. The event felt like a mini festival with banners, merchandise, and speeches. But Peter was in for a shock when he realized that Lois's wealthy father, Carter Pewterschmidt, was running the entire show. This revelation hit Peter hard, especially since Brian's words about big corporations controlling the movement now seemed all too accurate. When Brian learned that Carter was leading the Tea Party rally, he was quick to mock Peter, suggesting that Carter, an oil tycoon, would only use the movement to remove regulations that hindered his business interests. Peter, however, chose to ignore Brian's comments, convinced that Carter truly wanted him to play a significant role. Carter flattered Peter by calling him his PR officer, and Peter couldn't have been prouder. Meanwhile, Lois began to worry, suspecting her father was using Peter for his own gain. Carter wasted no time pushing Peter into action, instructing him to spread signs all over town calling for the elimination of the city government. Inspired, Peter eagerly complied, rallying people in Quahog to rise against local officials. As support grew, Mayor West, under heavy pressure from the crowd, eventually agreed to disband the city government. At first, Peter celebrated this victory, thrilled that the people's movement had succeeded. However, the town's self-management quickly turned into chaos. With no garbage collection services, litter piled up on the streets. Teenagers began indulging in drugs without fear of consequences, and the roads were a mess, with no traffic laws being enforced. Worse still, thick black smoke started polluting the air as Carter ramped up production at his factories, now unrestrained by environmental regulations. In the midst of this chaos, Quagmire announced that he'd impulsively married a giraffe, a bizarre decision he quickly regretted. Adding to the town's troubles, power outages became frequent as there were no city workers to repair broken lines. Furious and disheartened, Lois blamed Peter and his anti-government efforts for turning their once peaceful town into a disaster zone. Realizing he'd lost control of the situation, Peter decided to seek help from Carter. But Carter, who had gotten what he wanted, dismissed Peter's concerns, refusing to get involved any further. Feeling betrayed, Peter returned to his family and admitted his mistake. He realized he needed to take responsibility for the chaos he'd helped create. Peter gathered the townspeople and laid out a plan to restore order in Quahog. He also suggested a new tax system, where people would pay based on their financial status, with the funds going toward maintaining the city. The townies, impressed with Peter's newfound wisdom and leadership, cheered for him, grateful for a solution that restored balance. Lois, watching from the crowd, couldn't help but feel proud of Peter. She walked over to him, and he smiled, knowing he'd redeemed himself in her eyes. Peter's journey, from a misguided crusade to a responsible leader, taught him, and the town, a valuable lesson about the importance of governance and accountability.